To what is our actually last food for thought of this actually unbelievable academic year. And so it's a pleasure to see so many people joining. I know it's a very busy time, and we're incredibly excited to have Dr. Fryer join us today. We've really focused the year primarily on addressing and eliminating racism and increasing community engagement. And I think that having Dr. Fryer here, as suggested by Danny, who will be the person who will introduce him, is just really a great finale for the year. So I'll leave it at that, Craig, and let Danny do a formal introduction, and we'll go from there. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everyone. Well, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Fryer, Dr. Craig Fryer. He's someone whose work I've been following since I was in graduate school, and we've since had the opportunity to collaborate. His work has greatly influenced my own current research, so very excited to have him here. Dr. Fryer is an associate professor and the associate chair of the Department of Behavioral and Community Health at the University of Maryland School of Public Health, and he's also one of the founding associate directors of the Maryland Center for Health Equity. His research uses mostly mixed methods to examine some of the environmental and sociocultural contexts of health and well-being, with an emphasis on community engaged research, which we'll talk about a lot today. Substantively, his work focuses on racial and ethnic health inequalities in substance use, particularly the use of marijuana and tobacco among youth and young adults. And other research areas of interest include Black men's mental health, racism and health, and the respectful engagement of underrepresented communities in research. This will actually be the primary focus of his talk today. His work has been funded by the NIH, as well as FDA and CDC. And in addition to research, Dr. Fryer teaches graduate level courses in public health ethics, health behavior theory, multicultural health, and a new course that he designed and piloted in Black men's health. And Dr. Fryer has roots in SMS and at Mailman, so this is sort of a homecoming for him. Dr. Fryer earned his Doctor of Public Health degree from SMS under the mentorship of Drs. Robert and Mindy Fullilove. So welcome back, Dr. Fryer, and at this point, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you kindly, Danny, for that introduction, and thank you all for the invitation. It is actually quite wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Even if you don't remember me, I remember you, particularly as it relates to my doctoral training there. And I'm very appreciative of this invitation. So let me start by sharing my screen and telling you a little bit more about our discussion today. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Be good, Craig.
All right, give me 1 second. Give me 1 second here. I just lost my, give me a second. Technology.
Don't worry, we all have problems with technology.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry.
Yeah, just not right at the beginning of a presentation, huh? Okay, well, we'll just go with, if you can, give me a second here. So I've stopped sharing at this point. You see that, right? Okay, here we go. You see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so again, good morning and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today as it relates to the work that I have been doing essentially since I left or graduated from the school in 2006. It's good to see some familiar faces, and I hope that you find something of interest today in my work and points that you may be able to utilize as you think about your own research and practice. Today, I want to talk about this concept of how do we think very critically about the respectful engagement of communities that are minoritized in the US, and specifically those who are very skeptical of participation in research given historical research abuse and other traumatic experiences that they may have encountered. So I'm going to start and think about this from a series of perspectives. I'm going to go over an overview of key concepts that sort of shaped my work. And then I want to talk a little bit about CBPR. CBPR is not the gestalt of everything, but I do want to make sure that it is included as we think about community engagement. And then I want to talk to you about a typology that we have given some critical thought to in our Center for Health Equity. And then probably what's most important to you, what I would like to do is to highlight some selected research experiences that I've had that have really highlighted the value and the impact that community engagement can have in your work. So starting out with some of those concepts, I want to start with the definition of community engagement that resonates most with me. And this comes from the CDC in 1997, actually, and is often connected to CBPR. But it's this concept of thinking about how do you work collaboratively with and through groups of people that are affiliated. Either they define community as geographic proximity or special interests or other similar situations. And as we think about collaboratively working with and through groups, you want to address issues that are paramount for the community, but then you want to utilize what we consider to be partnerships and coalitions that already exist, our community assets that already exist. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So Marnie had mentioned that she's from Baltimore. And so Marnie, anything that I say now, please don't take it against my position with Maryland. I moved to Maryland to take the position at the University of Maryland about 10 years ago, 10 and a half years ago at this point. It was in the end of 2010. And you think of the beauty of Maryland, you really are talking about the DMV, right? So here is just a state map of the state of Maryland. And I always ask my students, the majority of whom are from Maryland, if you were asked to, you had the ability to create the 51st state of the US and you could draw it any way you want, would you use this shape as the state, right? The shape of a state. It has a very unique shape. But more than that, as we think about its neighbors and all that encompasses, you really get under layers of how diverse this particular area is. And so I want to share a narrative with you. I use narrative all the time, but I'll share this particular narrative with you because I was new to Maryland, had never lived here, had visited many times, relatives, but had never lived here. And so in my initial foray into trying to meet people, as I was thinking about my community engaged work, when I would meet individuals, I would say the traditional question about where do you live? And by and large, individuals would tell me the county they're from. I'm from Anne Arundel County, I'm from Prince George's County, blah, 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 blah. And my initial thought was, wow, they really don't want me to know where they live. So then I would say, well, in the county, where do you live? Now, I was speaking from my perspective. So I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, for the most part, if you ask someone where you live, they tell you the city in which they live, right? I'm from Pittsburgh, I'm from Philly, if you're in that city and you ask someone where they're from, by and large, you get a concept of their neighborhood, right? And so in my particular case, originally from the Hill District, and then I moved to a neighborhood called Hazelwood in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is very neighborhood centered, right? There's over 90 neighborhoods in the city. So when I was coming here and initially meeting people, I was like, wow, they really only tell you, they're really skeptical about you knowing where they live because they tell you the county. After the 10th time that this occurred, I realized that they were not the problem, I was the problem, right? What they were doing in this dialogue was actually shaping how they view community, right? And so the state of Maryland is very county specific. And clearly, if you ask someone where in the county they live, they will give you additional information. But it was really important for me to think about this as I was thinking about how is community defined where I'm currently trying to do work. And so the state of Maryland is bordered by 4 other states, right? So you have Pennsylvania to the north, you got Delaware to the east, you have West Virginia and Virginia as it relates to the Southwest. But then its direct partner is the district, which also happens to be the capital of the US. And people call this area the DMV, right? If you think about where people live, work, play, worship, right? They don't do it all in one locale. They are actually living across the DMV. This open my thinking as we think specifically about community and how it is defined. So we are trained, particularly in our scientific endeavors, to identify what is the problem. And we're really good at that, right? It's one of the ways in which we substantiate our research endeavors. Even in our practice endeavors, we have to identify very clearly what is the issue. And in this work in community engagement, you are equally responsible for identifying where are those community assets. And assets in communities are both at the individual and institutional level. So you want to think about skills of residents, the power of local associations. You want to think about resources both at the institutional and even broadly more the environmental level. This is really important as we think about community engagement, because one of the things that is very clear is that the residents of those communities would not describe their community in the way that you describe it in a research proposal, right? They have no connection to the way in which you describe, right? They find it very linear and in many cases judgmental and the like. So in the Center for Health Equity, we have given some thought to what we consider this typology of community engagement along a spectrum. And we came about this because initially we felt like the term community-based was being overused. And there was assumptions made that when you said community-based, people all assumed the same thing. And we were very clear that we knew that it wasn't, right? And so if we're trying to better understand different facets of community engagement, we wanted to think very critically about what those were. I want to share with you this typology, and out front, what I will say is that this is not placing a value on one over the other. They are all valuable because you have to meet the community where they are. And so community-placed initiatives, if you will, are along the line of this continuum of cooperation, right? At the beginning of cooperation. And so these 3 related terms are really important as you think about the engagement level, if you will, right? So I would think of community-placed initiatives as where you're beginning to start if you were with a new community partner in that regard. And so community-placed research has very little involvement from the community partner. They're cooperating, they're not against what is happening. But for example, they have not generated the idea, right? And they may even be accepting, but there wasn't a lot of involvement from them. So common examples may include where the community is a location for a meeting place, right? Or the community is a location for a new service. But other than its location, there is not much, if you will, involvement from the community or the community partner. Community-based initiatives will be more along the lines of coordination, where there is some involvement from the community partner, considerably more than community-placed, and calls for at minimum coordination as it relates to organization and administration of some aspect of the research. It could also include development of a procedure by a community partner or a decision of where research will be conducted or with whom, some aspects of the study. So if you think about community-placed, let's take the example, let's say it was a health clinic that was put into a community. The community would say, yes, it's nice that we have a health center, but had no real other involvement in that. At community-based level, they potentially would have said, we need a health center in our community, and this is exactly where we need it to be. They would talk about location, they would talk about its services. They may even talk to you about who needs to staff the community center or the health center, excuse me. If we then move further along the lines of that spectrum and we're looking at what we consider to be, and what the purists who do CVPR consider to be the full spectrum or the full partnership, the idea has to be generated by the community. And in that health center case, it would not only be that we need a health center, it would not only be where it's located, it would not only be who should staff it, but they may be telling you when it should be open, when it should be closed, that they may mandate that you hire staff from the community to work in that center. Talk very clearly about what its interior is like. What I would often like to say is the biggest difference from community place versus CBPR and full partnership is that community place is available. In CBPR, it's actually accessible, right? So people are actually utilizing those things that are part of their community or this initiative. So just something to think about as we think about this typology of community engagement. Another way of thinking about this along this same spectrum of cooperation that you see there under number 1, all the way through partnership that you see under number 6, is to think about community input in traditional research processes that we utilize in the field. So for example, if we were thinking about some of our clinical research, and here I'm not demonizing any aspect of the methods that I'm about to go over. What I am trying to say is the thinking clearly about community input that's often involved. Clinical research or some of our studies are often done with cooperation, meaning you have individuals who have provided consent to participate, but they may not remember even what they have done afterwards, right? We find this a lot. They're like, oh, they came here. What did you have to do? Oh, they asked me to take a shot for blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so what was the purpose of, right? There's no other connection, right? It's simply work that has been done. In the past, some individuals have referred to any level of research at just the cooperation level as drive-by research, right? Not to be judgmental or even pejorative, but to think about it in this particular regard. As we move along this continuum, we have some epidemiological studies that have had some level of coordination in them, where individuals are participating based on a need potentially in the community. Ethnography, as we move forward, in-depth interviews, focus groups, there's much more along the line of collaboration, potentially because the perspective of the participant is what is driving the work, right? And so there's much more community input in that regard. If you think about other methods like photo voice or visual voices, right? The actual participant is actually collecting that research data, right? So it's collaboration at even a higher level. And then if we put CBPR at the furthest end is full partnership, meaning the community stakeholders have been involved from the generation of the idea all the way through interpretation and dissemination of that information. This is a different way we're thinking about what it looks like across the spectrum from cooperation to partnership as we think about community input. Just another way to think about this particular work. And so I just want to say a few words about CBPR. And in this case, only as it referenced to it emerging at a time where there was a call and a need for more input from those who have been participating in research, and that the research enterprise was more inclusive of the needs of a community versus the needs of the investigator. And so this is work by Israel and her colleagues in 2005 who really put CBPR on the map. And the premise here, think about public health research, is this partnership approach. And I want to emphasize that they view it, and I view it as an approach, not necessarily a set of methods, but it's an approach that I believe requires the investigator to change their thinking around scientific endeavors, right? So there's reciprocal learning, and it should be a co-learning experience from that perspective. So why would we need to do in this regard, as we think about the 3 key concepts of CBPR, what are they? Participation is one major one. So community partners being involved from the beginning until quote unquote the end, whatever that end may be. Equal power is another one, right? So the values and the perspectives and the contributions are respected of the community, and the community is considered to be the unit of analyses here. And the other aspect of equal power is that when necessary, the investigator would help in developing community capacity. What has often happened in my work are needs are emerged from the community, and they say, hey, can you help us? We would like to gain better understanding of, learn more about. And so we're trying to help build those skills in those sets. And then the final key component is joint planning. And so again, from the beginning, that you view them as a true partner And things are not conceived or defined by you sitting in your office at work, which is more like the traditional way in which we conduct our research. And so why would CPPR be important? And I believe that particularly in the past 2 decades, we have seen this increasing interest for those of us who do health and equity research like I do, disappointing results in interventions as we think about application across populations, and increasing demands from both the community and funders in their interest in more community-driven versus community-placed research. But by and large, overall, particularly in the field of public health, we have to address very complex health and social ills, right? That are not necessarily always best suited for the outside expert. We actually need the expertise of those prioritized communities to assist us in solving these issues. We have expertise as it relates to our training and the information and the resources that we have, but the community has that same level of expertise and skills that we could utilize as we try to address these issues and are willing to do so. In my work, I have never had an experience where a community said, based on a need that they have identified, that they did not want to work with the investigator in that way. So much of what I have said up until this point raises the question, why would it be important to make sure that we are inclusive as we think about engagement in the research enterprise? And I would like to submit to you that more than just moral judgment are based on social moral values. There are scientific reasons why diverse study samples are critically important and partnerships are even important. And I offer to you that this need for participation is based upon 2 really important factors, sort of the multifaceted reasons as we think about the changing demographics in the US, as well as the scientifically driven pertinent points that I want to highlight in a minute. So you all know this, I'm not sharing anything that is relatively new, but you all probably even recall in 2008, the Pew Research Center looked at population by race and ethnicity, and they looked at actual population by those 2 elements in 1960 and in 2005. And then they projected for the 4 groups, racial and ethnic groups that we see here, what it would look like in 2050. And so for these 4 groups, self-identified white, non-Hispanic, self-identified Hispanic, self-identified Black, non-Hispanic, and self-identified Asian. What I first want you to recognize is the heterogeneity within each of these 4 groups. We are experts at comparing across groups, right? We do that in seconds in our head when we write proposals. We actually need to become better, from my personal perspective, in examining the heterogeneity within a group. And that means in every group. We don't talk about white ethnicity in the US primarily at a large extent at all, right? As a matter of fact, if you go by the US Census, we only recognize 1 ethnic group in the US, and that is those individuals who self-identify as Hispanic. We want to think very critically, what does it mean when someone identifies as Black and the heterogeneity within that group? Right? Black being more inclusive than the term African American. So these are really important things. And so we're increasingly becoming multi-ethnic as a group. As you can see here, we'll see decreases in those groups that self-identify as white, large increases in those who self-identify as Hispanic, relatively stable means for those who self-identify as Black, and really significant increases in groups that self-identify as Asian. But we're also becoming more pluralistic as a country, right? And one example would be our definition of family has changed drastically and has multiple components now, very different. And so we as investigators need to have the ability to make sure that we are, in our assessments, are actually having the ability to identify those changes in our work, right? If our skill set doesn't change as it relates to scientific endeavors, we're actually not addressing the public's health, particularly as these situations change. And so the other facet of this that's really important is the NIH Revitalization Act of 93, which you also know was revised in 97, 2000, and 2001. But this was federal law mandated by NIH, right, in this inclusion of women and children in research. And important work as we think about our scientific endeavors, but I also think implications for our findings as we think about application and practice. And so prior to this act, right, at NIH, in NIH grants, the instructions for reviewers primarily was you can have an outstanding scientific proposal, and your inclusion plan may not have been so great, and it didn't necessarily impact your score. The act says to reviewers, science can be outstanding. If the inclusion plan is unacceptable, you have to then have that reflected in the score. And I think this changed the game with some real consequences for some investigators. I will share with you, being an associate director in the Center for Health Equity, we were getting calls immediately from people. This is at my work at the University of Pittsburgh. It was actually the Center for Minority Health saying, can you help us recruit community X? And we would say, what happened? Oh, we got a poor inclusion plan score in our NIH proposal, right? It's that direct, right? And we offer that you should involve your thinking around inclusion plans at the beginning of the stages when you're thinking about your proposal, not because you run into an issue much later. So in the Center for Health Equity, where I'm currently at the University of Maryland, we have looked at this issue of community engagement from various perspectives. This is just some selected pubs from our work, but thinking about the influence of race and ethnicity on becoming a human subject as it relates to participation in work. Building a fund of goodwill is much more about how we reframe research engagement and thinking about it from a different perspective, not just solely focused on research. What are the attributes of researchers and their strategies as they are trying to recruit minoritized populations? We have advanced and thought very critically about these in a whole host of ways. I want to bring your attention to one, not because I'm the first author, but because of the significance of what I believe this potential article to be. This was published in 2016, and we had a large bioethics grant that had 3 aims, data collection aims, and then 2 aims that were about the development of curricula. I will never write another grant with 5 aims, never. But anyway, with that being said, one of the aims was to interview scientists who had been deemed successful in recruiting diverse study samples. And these were individuals whose names we got from NIH Reporter and from word of mouth through other scientific endeavors. And one question on that interview protocol asked this. We asked investigators, so they had to be a principal investigator, what role did their own racial and ethnic background have in their ability to successfully recruit diverse study populations? So we're asking an investigator to self-reflect. Was quite interesting. Many PIs initially were like, oh, I'm not responsible for recruitment anymore, right? They have big research teams, so they hire individuals to recruit. And we said, no, we need you to self-reflect, right? The premise is, who's responsible for recruitment? I don't care if you have a team of 20 recruiters. It's the PI, right? And so the PI sort of sets the mantra about what is recruitment. And I'll give you a quick example. I did my master's work in public health at the University of Pittsburgh. I was one of the excited students, right? Couldn't wait to get to class, couldn't wait to get some kind of research experience. I was green, had just understood and identified public health as the field that I wanted to be in. And I applied to be a part of a research team and got the position, and I'm very excited. And I remember the first day on the job, the principal investigator brought me and 4 other people in the room, and he said, so I want to introduce you all to each other. You're responsible for recruitment of participants into this large study. We all looked at each other and nodded and said, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. And we all looked like those 4 categories of populations that I just showed you in the Pew Research Center graph. So I was the Black or African-American person there. There was a self-identified white woman there. There was a self-identified Asian woman there. And there was a self-identified Hispanic male there. And the PI, self-identified white male, said, so Craig, you're responsible for recruiting our Black participants. Literally, this is what was said. So-and-so, you're responsible for recruiting the white, the Hispanic, and the Asian. And I remember I looked at everybody else, and then I raised my hand and I said, so I don't know all, I'm self-identified as Black, that's true. I don't know all Black people. I can't recruit all Black people to this study, right? Now I'm making what sounds like a very simplistic statement on purpose because I'm trying to get a reaction from, clarify for me that you didn't say what you just said, right? So there are assumptions made as we think about race matching or racial concordance, where you want to have representation on your research team for those that you are interested in recruiting into your work or engaging in practice. I offer that that representation does matter, but in and of itself is not the magic pill for recruiting a diverse study sample. What you ultimately should be looking for are attributes and values that that person has as it relates to engaging with other humans. So yes, racial concordance can be beneficial, primary, not the factor. This is what these investigators said. Their attributes that they identified or the shared values that they identified that they felt were pertinent in their success, if you will, of recruiting diverse study samples was trustworthiness. It was the main one, right? Am I trustworthy enough that somebody would want to work with me on my research? Active listening, ability to express empathy, reciprocity, transparency, and humility. And when they were asked to self-reflect on that question that I mentioned to you, they often responded in two perspectives, either this motivation to do good work that would make some real difference, not just the next publication for them, and the lived experience. So they often drew upon their own lived experience in a way to connect to the individuals that they were trying to recruit into their work. So this is probably what you're most interested in and what I'm most excited to talk to you about. But I just wanted to highlight for you a couple of research experiences that I have had where I believe community engagement had great impact into my scientific thinking, right? The outcome of the work in this regard. And I'll start with the first one. Well, let me tell you this. So I just want to bring you into my world. So this is my world. This is actually, my research focuses on the health and well-being of urban youth and young adults, specifically examining the role and the context that smoking plays in their lives. It's one of my main research objectives. And in 2009, I was awarded with an NCI KO1 award, a career development award, where I used both qual and quan methods in a way to specifically look at correlates of adolescent nicotine dependence. So this is the worldview that was shaping my work at this time. So the first example actually comes from a different study while I was writing my KO1 and its impact that it had on recruitment. And so much so that I changed my recruitment strategies in my research study for the development of the KO1. So I was at Pitt, had just gotten to Pitt. For many of you who don't know, I am sort of a non-traditional graduate of the program in that I didn't do a postdoc. I took a faculty position right after my doctoral research and training at Columbia. And I was a little anxious, like, can I really do this, right? As an assistant professor. And when I realized that I wanted to develop my KO1, I started to essentially find other individuals who were doing tobacco control research at the university, and came across an individual by the name of Bill Shadle, who was doing work at Pitt. He was a faculty member at Pitt, but he was actually a senior scientist at RAND Corporation. RAND Corporation has a site that is right down the street of the University of Pittsburgh. And I did a cold call, cold email, asked him if we could meet, told him a little bit about myself and this idea I had for a KO1. And my goal was to get him to agree to be on my mentoring team, which he did. Well, a week later, Bill calls me and says, Craig, can we have another conversation? And I went and spoke to him, and he invited me to be a co-investigator on a funded study. He had just got it funded, which is why I got the call, where he essentially was interested in deconstructing anti-smoking PSAs, or public service announcements, as it related to adolescent responses. At this time, we knew that anti-smoking PSAs worked. They were effective in preventing the initiation of smoking among very young people, but we didn't know what about them made them effective. And so Bill wrote this proposal, and NIDA funded it, was an R21, to essentially deconstruct them. And he was very interested. Bill is trained as a psychologist. He was very interested in the moderating role of self-concept and what role did the anti-smoking argument play as related to their attitudes, refusal, self-efficacy, and future smoking intention. So in all of my naivete, listening to Bill, I said, Bill, I would love to come on board. I was excited that he saw me as a co-investigator. He was like, you have a lot of previous experience working with youth and young adults. But in my naivete, I said to Bill, well, Bill, I will do it in one caveat, one condition. He said, what's the condition? And I said, if we could recruit a study sample that was 50% self-identified Black or African-American. And he looked at me. I remember this look very well, with really big eyes. And he was like, 50% of the sample? I said, Bill, for us to have the ability to do real solid racial ethnic analyses, right? If we're really trying to look at differences, we need a healthy sample. He said, I've never done this before, but I'm willing to make an attempt. So the way this was set up, it was a laboratory-based cross-sectional correlational design study where young people were asked to attend 3 90 to 120-minute sessions over a 3 to 4 week period. So think of it as they would come week to week for anywhere from 1.5 to 2 hours. They would watch videos. We had over 250 videos of anti-smoking PSAs from the CDC, and they were given surveys to complete, critiquing what they liked, did not like. You get the point over time. They also completed tobacco questionnaires, other self-assessments as related to message. And hence, this is the work that started. Now, when I said I was naive as I put this condition on my participation at a sample that self-identified, 50% of the sample self-identified as Black African-American, at the time, one of the biggest issues tobacco control researchers were saying was that they had this issue with the retention and recruitment of diverse study samples, putting youth of color in. How do we get them in our work? And so I want to highlight for you what we attempted to do in this study. So here's our recruitment flow chart. Hopefully this white background doesn't blind you too much. But we started this particular recruitment campaign, which I would consider to be a traditional multimedia campaign, things that you hear about most often. So we use flyers that we posted at both schools and youth serving organizations. We also did it in newspapers, both parent-oriented newspapers and high school newspapers. Whenever you're recruiting young people, you also have to recruit their parents, right? Because you have to get parental consent. And then we had a radio spot on the only Black radio station, if you will, in the city of Pittsburgh. When I read over this initial recruitment strategy, I thought, yes, it's very common what we do here, but I thought it represented the work in the way that we usually do it. So we started with this recruitment campaign. And in the 4th month, we met bi-weekly for this study. And at the beginning of the 4th month, Bill calls me. The meeting was the next day. And he says, so Craig, tomorrow's meeting, I really want to focus on recruitment. We have an issue. And I said, what's the issue? So at the time at month 4, we had recruited 25 young people into the study. 100% of them are self-identified as white. Bill says, remember what your condition was? I hope you have an answer. I told you I'm brand new. So I go to this meeting the next day and I remember walking into the building like, okay, you're gonna have to figure, they're looking for you for the answer. Well, lo and behold, I was an assistant director of our Center for Minority Health. We have a community infrastructure to support our center, and part of that community infrastructure were community-based organizations that serve youth. And I offered to Bill that what we needed to do was to engage a community partner to help us rethink how we can engage young people who self-identify as Black into this work. And through that work, we developed what I refer to as the Community Enhanced campaign. It was community-based because it was designed with the community stakeholder. It was peer-led recruitment. So we hired young people at that youth serving CBO to recruit other young people like themselves. And it was youth-centric, where they had the opportunity to make decisions as related to the work in and of itself. So that Community Enhanced campaign started in month 5 and also ran months 5 through 8. We did not stop the traditional multimedia campaign. I want to be very clear. It was successful, but it was limited in who it was able to recruit. So both ran. Data collection ended in month 9. We did some data analyses, and then I did teach-ins with the youth. So one of the biggest points for me, I am a youth supporter in all ways. When people say, oh, I have a community advisory board, I said, well, how many youth serve on your community advisory board? And they look back at me. I was like, so you don't have a community advisory board. You have an adult community advisory board. If you don't have the perspective or the voices of youth, right, you're missing a really important segment of the community. Part of this is we need to view research participants as consumers of our work. And so a big part of my work is that I share findings back. And so I was doing teach-ins with youth in month 11 based on what we found and getting feedback as it related to relevance, salience, as we think about this work. So what do we do? And I love to show this slide only because too often community engaged work is viewed as being too expensive, right? When we did a comparison of our recruitment campaigns, traditional to community enhanced, if you look at our recruitment rate, right, there was more in community enhanced. Now there's real reasons for that. So let me share with you what that was like. We met with this community organization for an entire month just talking, like not about, hey, we're coming in here, we got a research study and we have a problem. What do you do? How do you do it? What are some of the interests of the young people? Here is what we do. What do you think about what we do? And lo and behold, this particular community-based organization had a group of young people who wanted to be more productive and be promoters of anti-smoking messages. And I said, do you think they would be interested in? And so they helped us as we thought about this particular recruitment strategy. We conducted the actual lab sessions at the community center. We did that once a week. The day that they chose was Monday from 6 to 8 p.m. If you can believe that. I just knew it was going to be a Saturday or a Friday. They were able to have a makeup day on Thursday. So if they missed Monday, they could do it Thursday because young people wanted to stay with their cohort. So they imagine they were with their cohort 3 consecutive Mondays. If they missed one, they can make up Thursday and then do the next session on that Monday. If you look at, they were working for the groups that we wanted them to work for as we think about race and ethnicity. And when we look at cost, it was cheaper to do it this way than it was for sort of the individual coming into RAND Corporation, into their beautiful offices and spaces, conference rooms. But it was much more individual, one young person at a time, where the community enhanced was group. And I will offer you that the final thing here is that as we think about our study sample, 55% self-identified as Black. Bill shook my hand at the end and said, I have never done this before. I did not believe after 4 months we were going to be able to do this, but really helped me cement that, hey, I can do this. And I was able to demonstrate for someone else the power of what that could be. Even for our small study, we were able to recruit 133 young people into this particular work. But really important as I thought about the impact of community engagement on recruitment. I'll move faster. This second experience was much more about study focus and new directions. This was the first pilot study I had at the University of Pittsburgh. So the Center for Minority Health had a P60 grant, which was a center grant. We had a pilot program. I applied to the pilot program. And so I was PI of this particular study. The title that you see there actually came from young people. So that was not my initial title. But I was very interested in, as you see in those original aims, language that young people utilize as they were defining nicotine addiction. Remember, I'm trying to write this K on correlates of nicotine dependence. So now I'm doing some preliminary work to get a better understanding of this. And how did young people contextualize factors that they associated with their cigarette use, stress, advertising peer social dynamics. Well, here's the story. I'm at a community-based organization. As a matter of fact, this particular community-based organization was an organization that I used to attend when I was very young, growing up in Pittsburgh. And the youth development coordinator said, hey, you can share, like give a 5-minute spiel on your research study. If young people are interested, you can provide them with a parental consent form, informed consent form. They would take it home, talk with their parents. If their parents agreed, they signed and brought it back. And then I was going to conduct these focus groups. I finished my spiel. A young man walks up to me and says, wow, your work sounds really interesting. But smoke what? And I was like, oh, I thought it was very clear that I'm focused on cigarette use. So I say cigarette use. And he says, oh, okay, I can't help you, and walks away. Literally minutes later, a second young person says, hey, I think I'm interested. May I have a consent form? I hand it over to him. And then they said, but can you clarify, smoke what? I was like, what is going on? I thought I was being punked. I thought I was in a TV show. So I said, cigarettes. Oh, no, I can't help you. So I was like, wait, the third time it happened, I said, okay, I'm doing something wrong. What were they communicating to me? These were young people who smoke, but they identify as marijuana users, not cigarette users. I went back, redesigned. I remember I made an amendment to the IRB, said, I'm more interested in the role of smoking, not being so focused on the product. What role does smoking play in your life, right? Redesigned the whole thing, went right back, did the same spiel again, but now I'm saying it doesn't matter what product, if you smoke, blah, 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 and was able to recruit some of those same young people into this study. So smoke what was really connected to their smoking identity. Here I use both active and passive recruitment strategies that I just mentioned to you. I did screening in person. It's really important for me to talk to young people. I always ask for participant assent in addition to parental consent. I never want a young person to feel like their parents want them to be in the study. And so that's why they're there. And then eligible participants were invited to these focus groups. I just want to share with you that I did not have a question on smoking self-identity. It was not part of my thinking. But this interaction with them around this conversation of smoke what, and I just want to share with you these very quick 4 examples that came right after one another in one focus group. The complexity of it and the complicate, right? So Dina, 19, said, he's a smoker. She's talking about a friend. He's a smoker. He don't smoke cigarettes, but he's a smoker. At this time, this particular group of young people wanted to conceal. I'm going to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you what I smoke, right? Misha said, I'm not a smoker, but I smoke. Rachel said, I think they're including both marijuana and tobacco. Like you smoke, somebody will say, yeah, but you don't know what they're saying, yeah, too. And then Kyle, because he was irritated by this part of the conversation, says, I identify myself as a smoker because I smoke weed. He was like, I don't care what you may think or whatever, this is what this is. And so this, I was like, wait a second, so what is this about? And it led to, how did young people begin to smoke marijuana? What role did cigarette use play? All this changed this particular pilot study that I was then able to incorporate into my KO1 proposal. And then, so that's an impact on the content or focus of the study, and then also new direction. And then this last experience I want to share with you is really the impact on partnerships. And so a collateral research interest that I have is in Black men's health. And at the Maryland Center for Health Equity, we had a second center grant, was actually a P20. I wrote an administrative supplement to talk to, interview Black men around this issue of healthy coping strategies. And I wanted to better understand their experience and conception of what was health and wellness as it related to their lives. And what came out of this work, oh, let me just share this with you. Part of our community infrastructure for the Center for Health Equity is what we refer to as the HARE project. HARE stands for Health Advocates in Reach and Research. It is actually 6 barbershops and 3 beauty salons, both in the district, so both in DC and in Maryland. Our headquarters shop, if you will, is actually in Hyattsville, Maryland, in Prince George's County. And Hyattsville is sort of borders the northeast quadrant of DC. So gentrification in Northeast DC is very similar to other parts of the district. But the barbershop's clientele reflects the community. And so it's been relatively stable. But this particular barbershop, by and large, you would consider to be its clientele would self-identify as Black and as Hispanic. This photo here that you see here is actually the interview room that we built into this shop. So when we were doing this initial preliminary work, the barbers and the clientele said, I want to do the interview here. Often we would go meet there and say, hey, we can go over to the university. No, I thought we were doing the interview here. So we, with permission, of course, and a whole bunch of collaboration from the University of Maryland, built out an interview space in the barbershop in and of itself. In this particular case, this barber is being screened because one of the things the barbers ask for is screening services to come into the shop, right? They want us to help facilitate those processes. So that's what you see here. But I conducted 40 interviews. I didn't conduct them, let me say this. I was in charge of this particular sub-project, and I'll tell you who conducted the interviews in a second. We actually had 2 doctoral students, self-identified Black male doctoral students who did the interviews. They were being trained. One of our unique departments in our School of Public Health is family science. They were being trained as counselors. And so they were licensed therapists, which was really important because what came out of this work was this pressing need and the emergence of mental health for Black men. And it was Black men who were saying these particular things. So after this work had been conducted, barbers said through our hair network, we're like, there's other things we want to do. And I said, well, what are some of those things they want to do? And one of the things was they wanted to have the ability to come together as a larger group. They want to support other barbers and other stylists. And this is literally what my barber said to me. You know how you all have conferences? Like you always telling me you going to this conference and that conference, we want to have a conference. And so that's what we did. This is actually located, University of Maryland built a 5-star hotel recently, and I think actually in 2018. And so when we asked the barbers where they wanted to meet, they said we want to meet at that hotel. I have to be honest with you, I didn't think we would be able to pull it off, but we were able to pull it off because it's extremely expensive. But they wanted a conference, and when we asked them what was it about, one of the things that they wanted to do was to get together and honor one another, but they also wanted to have the opportunity to meet with other researchers and have this conversation about the role that Black barbers and stylists and their locations could have as you think about community infrastructure. And so we did a innovation design studio on biomedical clinical trials. We invited 3 important stakeholder groups. So it was barbers and stylists, it was investigators, and it was funders to come together and to do this work in this regard. This happened in December of 2019. And I'll just share with you here, this is one of the screenings that's happening at the barbershop. To your far right, this is actually my barber. This is Mr. Freddie Spry. He would be ecstatic that I'm saying his name to you all today. But he was highlighted in a article in Community Care that the title was "The Doctor Is In." I would just say, and this is the photo from that title of the cover of the article, and that is posted on his wall right now as we speak. But we had the opportunity to hear from barbers about as they think about their industry, right? And they understand and recognize the important role that they play in the department, regardless of what is happening sociopolitically, right? So if any of you have never been in a Black barbershop or Black beauty salon, people come to those locations even if they're not getting service, their hair is not being done or cut. Individuals view it as a bastion of the community as it relates to stakeholders and locations, right? My barber loves to say we never close, regardless if there's a recession or not. He was shocked that they had to close during the pandemic, but they had to do what they needed to do in this regard. And they clung to this mantra during this particular conference on no research on us without us. They were really adamant that they needed to be viewed as a partner and wanted input as related to that type of work. And so here are just some selected photos from our different shops. They're talking about barriers to participation as they think about the issue of trust. And this last quote is a barber reflecting on a researcher who came to his shop to talk about their research. And he was saying you could feel in the air how uncomfortable they were just being here. And I thought to myself, how are they going to recruit people from here? No one would talk to you because we can feel that you're very uncomfortable. And so we want to think very critically about what those things mean. Our next steps for our hair network is to assist them in things that they have identified. They talked about establishing a National Association of Barbers and Stylists for Health. We feel very strongly, we presented this to them to get their input about a set of research ethical standards for barbers and salon health programs. So if you want to do a program utilizing those locations, what could be a set of ethical standards in that regard? And then they had heard the term community health worker and begin to ask us, what was that? Who were they? What does that mean? And they're very interested in becoming certified CHWs in this regard. And I'm wrapping this up, and thank you for your time and attention. So as we think about key points of community engagement as a process, some are, right, make a lot of sense as we think about open communication, but open communication is much more about transparency. And what are your aims? What are your desires? What is your goal as it thinks about their research? I had a young person say to me, after the end of it, I was like, how old are you? But I had a young person say to me once, when I was recruiting, like, I understand you got to write papers about it, but I want you to talk to me about your work in a different way. And I was like, how do you know I have to write papers about my particular work, right? But very interesting to think about. I want to know what part of your purpose may be. How do you create ownership and accountability with your community partner in the work, right? Really important as you think about what they get out of it, right? Our barbers are very proud to be associated because they feel like they get something out of it in that regard. A big assumption that is often made is that even when you talk about community engagement, or let alone if you're talking about CBPR, that you assume that they understand. That is the most requested informational session from us. And we have to do it multiple times to the same group of people, right? Because they truly are trying to understand the language that it took us years to understand, right? And then of course, to acknowledge and value the community as a whole. All these things have been very pertinent in my work. And so in concluding, what is my overall statement? And my overall statement is this, and I will adhere that in some ways it may be biased, but community engaged research and practice enhances, establishes, and accelerates our ability to do public health work in all those facets, and all of its facets, and all of its complexities, and in all of the issues that are often raised. And it doesn't mean if you're not doing it that you can't in any way, right? It's very clear that you can still contribute to what we learn about the public's health. But ultimately their exclusion, I think, is to the detriment of the work that we do, particularly as we self-identify our work as public health and not other traditional biomedical fields. And then the final thing I'll say, we have some resources in our center, these education programs that I mentioned before, curricula that we have designed. We have a curricula for community members on what it means to be an informed decision maker as it relates to research participation. And then we have a curriculum for investigators about being a self-reflective researcher and really giving some deep thought to why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, I know that was a lot and I know we're on Zoom, but thank you for your time. If you have questions, please let me know.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fryer. At this point, anyone who has a question can just jump in on the mic. I have some myself, but I'll wait to see if we have any from the audience first.
Okay, I won't mind starting and taking the opportunity. This is an inspiring conversation, of an inspiring talk. Craig, I have one question. When you showed us the continuum and you spoke about drive-by research, you said no judgment. But when I hear your conclusion, I feel like there's a little bit of a judgment there. And I was wondering whether you can say a little bit more about that. And the reason for asking is that my postdocs in a way believe that the only research you can do nowadays is CBPR research. And I feel like, well, wait a minute, it's not the Holy Grail.
Yep. Yep. Well, thank you for the question. And I said no judgment, and I actually mean no judgment. So if you interpret it as there was judgment, that was not my intent. What I mean by my conclusion is that, and this is where my bias sits, the majority of my work has been community engaged work. Is there a role for non-community engaged work in public health? Absolutely. You have a real understanding of the issues that we're trying to address in public health, right? And what makes us uniquely different as an interdisciplinary field is that we are challenged with some of the most complex issues in that regard. So we need investigators not only with varied methodological skill sets, but also coming across from every discipline that we can name. That's what we need to truly address the public's health. What I offer and what I meant when I said non-judgment was because there was a time where if you were doing community engaged work, that was judged. So let me just share with you what I was told when I first said I wanted to do community engaged work. Craig, that takes too much time. You won't get tenure. Too much time, too much cost. You won't get tenure. You got to get pubs out, right? And so often in my work, the work that I do, if you think about traditional quantitative analyses, Danny will recognize this. I'm looking for a national data set, and I want to do some examination using some analytical tool to think about the population I'm most interested in. By and large, our national data sets, samples are too small for the groups that I'm interested in. The worst data sets literally they put every population into two groups. They'll have white, non-white. It's a disaster for taxpayer dollars. So I was often hindered, right? Even in writing proposals initially, saying I would like, and they were like, well, where's your justification that this group is needed? And I say, well, if you break this down a little bit further, I remember I spent my first year calling people. I would read articles and say, this is a great article. And then I would call them and say, can you give me the actual breakdown? Because in the article, you only broke it down into this particular case. Yes, we need all skill sets, all methodological expertise, and all types of work. What I'm offering is that they work in complementary to one another and not diametrically opposed. And the other thing that I will say this, and I want us to, I share this every time I have to teach a research methods course. And this actually comes from my training and SMS. So if you disagree with what I'm about to say, then you have to blame the department. You all know that in Research Methods 101, your job is to develop the best research question that is going to move whatever area of interest you have, what is going to move the research agenda forward. You're supposed to come up with the best research question. And then you utilize, right, through your expertise, you think about what methods do I need to use to answer this research question, regardless of what they are. And if those methods aren't in your area of expertise, you then collaborate with those who have it, right? Well, you and I both know that the more traditional common way is that we write research questions that fit our methodological expertise. And I offer, whatever you think about that, it may not be the best research question to move our research agenda forward. So you have done this many times. You have read an article and said, whatever you thought about the article, it was great, it wasn't so great. And then you said, but I think I read this before. And I offer that you have. Because what tends to happen is we get very thin slices in those publications because we are writing proposals that fit because of convenience, because, right, time is short, because we have to, right? We are publish or perish. And so we got to get it out. We got to bring in money to do the work and then to get it out in a particular timely fashion. And in my work in health disparities and health inequity or health equity, as I'm looking through that lens, I am more driven by what is the best research question so that we can have greater impact. not the question that necessarily fits, but then that allows me to collaborate with anybody in the world. I mean, nowadays you can collaborate with anybody in the world. And so I'm driven in not just me, there are others, but we just have different ways in which we're driven. But no, CBPR, and I would offer that every community is not ready for CBPR. That's why the typology, I think, is very important. There's no value against one or the other. You need to think very critically, what is the best fit for this particular community stakeholder? Thank you for that question. It's a great question.
Thank you for the answer, Greg. I appreciate it.
Greg, we did get a request to stop screen sharing so we could see each other's faces a little better, if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry.
I have a question for you, Dr.
Sure.
Fryer. I really enjoyed hearing about the barbershop-based work that you were doing, and those are community members who certainly have commercial interests, but also have genuine interests in the health of their community members. And I think similar kinds of community members and partners are retailers. And you do a lot of work on either heavily restricted substances or even illicit substances. And something that a challenge that I faced in my own work is recruiting those retailers to engage in the work. I mean, even using CBPR methods, there's this tension in that they are interested in community health, but they're also selling substances that do not promote community health. So we've always struggled with interviewing tobacco retailers or retailers in marijuana dispensaries because there's this tension there. So do you have any experiences or recommendations for engaging more of those types of community partners in research?
It's a fantastic question, and I would offer an extremely complex issue, right? So do I have any direct experience? No, but I will tell you something that has come up in the work that I do, particularly around, and I think, Danny, you'll remember this, when, the MSA and the suing of the tobacco industry, and we had access then to those tobacco documents, right? So I have had some work where we have shared tobacco industry documents with community members and saying, when you talk to most individuals who smoke any substance, they believe that they've made an individual decision to use that particular product or brand. And then when you're told, no, actually you were marketed a particularly right. And in some communities of color, there's predatory marketing. Retailers are really interesting as a group. And I will say this, as you know, because I attempted to replicate one of your studies in the district, which is how you and I actually began the first talking. When I had young people who were going into the stores, in the retail stores, to do those store observations, there were a couple of store owners who identified as Black or Hispanic and said, hey, I want to do more around prevention of young people. I actually don't want young people to be here, and they wanted to be engaged. And we were having conversations about what that would look like, trying to bring them into the fold. But then when you get to, well, I get paid to have these products in my establishment by the tobacco industry, and we're trying to think very clearly about how we do that. The question then becomes, how could my relationship with you help supplement the loss that I will take? This is a very complex issue, and I think that we have to think about it in a different way. The first thing I would say off the top of my head is that we need to have a conversation with retailers about what role they believe they can play. Not from our perspective of what role do they, when they say they potentially may be interested or you may be interested, you may have a clearly defined way in which you think that they can be involved. But I think they have to work through what that is for them. And I don't know if you know much about, you may know more about payments as it relates to, for example, having a power wall in your retail establishment. But it's a significant, it's more money than I thought it was, let me put it that way. But the tobacco industry has that kind of money. And even when you are using CBPR, what I would offer are community engagement processes. Let's not have a focus just on CBPR, which, let me say this while I'm talking. CBPR has 9 principles. So CBPR purists, which I am not, believe that if you're not using all 9 principles, you're not doing CBPR. This is why I refer and prefer the term community engagement. But with that being said, I'm wondering if we would do a better job in this regard as we think about retailers to bring them into the fold, to initiate a conversation only to say, this is what we do. What do you think that you could potentially provide or help or assist us with? One of the things that I have learned from that particular study is that these 3 retailers said that they feel like they're viewed as the bad guy. And it's the only way that they're perceived by those who do the work that we do. And I offered that I didn't see it that way. They have a business and there's a bottom line for those businesses. But I think retailers are untapped resource. I don't know if that answered your question, Danny, but that's what I got, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, it's complex. Thank you. I think we could probably fit in one more question, but it is one. So if anyone has to leave for class or meetings, thank you for
Dr.
joining.
Fryer?
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Fryer. My name is Gina Wingren, and thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I've actually had the pleasure of working with your colleagues, Sandra Quinn and Stephen Thomas. I was at Emory for a long time, so they're great friends, and it's great to meet you today. In regards to your talk, I wanted to ask you a question. So I enjoy community engaged research as well, but one question that keeps on coming is how do you actually sustain these partnerships once you put all the time and work and effort into developing them? How do you sustain them?
It's a fantastic question. I'm gonna try to give you my short but hopefully comprehensive answer. So in the center, one of the things that we have said, most of partnerships, in this case, academic community partnerships, often are initiated based on a proposal, a grant proposal. And we actually believe that that may not be the best way to do that. However, let's say that that is the way that you're initiating this partnership, which is fine. That you are committed to working with them if the grant gets funded or not, right? Grants in, that's a part of what they're doing. If you take our hair network, so one of the things we try to do is to think about stakeholders in the community as they define themselves, and then bring them into the fold regardless of the research we're doing, right? And so the hair network was developed not from a grant, it was developed as a part of the community infrastructure of our center. And then when they begin to ask questions about how can we do more, right? Because barbers and stylists view themselves as ambassadors of their community and they wanted to do more. So we talked about there are individuals, how could barbershops and beauty salons be used as venues for recruitment of a particular group? That's one example. They begin to ask for services, but we initially started with, this is going to be a long-term relationship regardless of what we're doing. Research is one avenue of doing that. Others is asking them how would they want to be involved with us and figuring out how we can do that. Like that conference was, right, that design workshop that then brought in other researchers and other funders. I will say from that particular example, Gina, we now have 2 funders who are funding new initiatives with us in our hair, right, once they heard about the hair network. And then I will say this, although I didn't do a postdoc after my doctoral work, I did apply for them, and I had an interview at the University of Michigan. I'll never forget this. And I was in Flint, and they were introducing us to a community partner. That community got together with those academic partners every month, regardless, and they had been meeting for a year with no grant. I think if we can establish that we're in it to win it, regardless of what that looks like, we're here to build a long-term relationship. And what we have to think about, I always talk, when I'm talking to our students, I'm always saying, think about if you were interested in dating someone, right? So recruitment is different than retention, right? Recruitment is, how can I get you interested to have a conversation? Retention is, how do I keep your interest over time? And I think that in this particular case, things have to evolve or as organically as possible with that community member, with the give and take of, you are often doing some things that are for them and about them. And then there are some things where you may need them to do some things. So I'll give you this example. Our barbers and stylists were very upfront about, they wanted their locations to be used for services. Like right now, one of the things they're clamoring for, they want that interview room to be used for COVID testing or COVID vaccine shots, right? We're still trying to figure that out because of course, the world is trying to figure that out, right? But the premise here is that they wanted to use it in a way. So our extension, our sustainability is because we're using a whole host of different things. Research is just one avenue to keep them engaged. Service is another that I think is really important. And then I think we look to them as we think about what is the next step for even their own growth, right, in this area. For example, their interest in becoming a certified community health worker. But I think it's the biggest challenge as we think about community engagement. How do you do that over time?
Thank you.
And thank you. Oh, Gina, by the way, we have also worked with, you've done some work with the Jamaats.
Yes, quite a bit.
I used to do a lot of work with them as a doctoral student.
Oh, that's great.
I used to literally get on the bus for 5 consecutive weekends to get to Philadelphia to do some of that work.
Yeah. Great to see you. Great to meet you.
No, great to meet you as well.
So shall I jump in, Danny? Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Craig, such a pleasure. I know most people are sliding off and having to move on. I personally, and I think I reflect all that attended and what SMS believes in, that this was just a super finale for the year. I see lots of nods, and both from the perspective of, you've had lots of nice comments in the chat. Someone said it's just so much to think about for our teaching and our research. And Marnie says super finale is perfect. She's from Baltimore, so I think we can trust her.
Thank you, Marnie.
So really just such appreciation and pride for us, and a role model for us. I love the idea of what you're doing in your center, and hopefully we'll stay in touch on this. I think we can learn a lot from you, and we're proud to have you to be of us, as we say in SMS.
I would love to stay in touch, and again, it is great to see so many familiar faces. Hi, Angela, how are you? It's been my pleasure, and I would love to continue to talk about it. I mean, Danny's not going anywhere, and you know, Yasmin will never.
No.
Never leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Joyce signed on for a while, Craig. Just FYI.
Oh, okay.
You got some of your old crew.
Yes. Good to
So
see
you're
you.
obviously you're an influencer for sure, Craig. So thank
Oh,
you very
thank you.
much, as represented by people that wanted to see you from the past, and those of us
Yeah.
who don't know you from the past and
Right.
are impressed by the present. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. I really do appreciate it. It's a little daunting when